So I'm looking at Twitter right now, and there's a person putting out a hiddenness of God argument. And there are a bunch of different versions of the hiddenness of God argument. Eventually I'm going to deal with all of them. Some are famous, some are not so famous. But here's why, just in general, and this is just a first take on the whole subject. But here's something to consider, because this hasn't been brought up. I've never seen this brought up before. But the hiddenness of God argument would be a really, if you're talking about in terms of Christian theology, so you're talking about the Christian God, be a really, really good argument if the Bible didn't say in plain English, in a really, really clear way, that God is hidden. Yeah, surely you are God who hides his face. Couldn't be more crystal clear than that. Surely you're a God who hides his face. And the Bible tells you in plain English that God is hidden. That's not the only place it says it. It says it hundreds of different times, or a bunch of different times, a bunch of different ways. Matter of fact, the Bible says, seek the Lord while he may be found. Implying what? Put those two scriptures together and you have what? What type of an implication? One, God is hidden. Two, the onus of responsibility for seeking him is on you, and there's a window of opportunity. It says, seek the Lord while he may be found, which means the onus is on you, A, and B, there's a limited window of opportunity wherein you can actually find. Now, what that actually means is not 100% clear. Could mean before you die. It could mean before, God just gets tired and moves on. I'm sick of that guy. He's not looking for me. I'm sick of that guy. He's not looking for me. I'm not dealing with him anymore. Either way. Now, one of the things that an atheist will tell you, or a person who's a non-believer will tell you, is that there's no evidence for God. But that's not actually true. There might not be evidence for God that is convincing enough to you to believe in God, but there's plenty of evidence for you to begin questing for God. And people misinterpret Romans 1:20. Romans 1:20 basically says that people are without excuse because there's ample evidence of God in just, the creation itself, the glory of the mountains, for example. Now, I've heard people tell me this argument who weren't necessarily practicing Christians or apologetics, but they've actually told me this in real life terms. For example, my father. He's never read Romans 1:20, or if he did, he read it glancingly. He was a kind of Christian. He'd go to church on Sundays. But that was the beginning and the end of his spiritual quest. But I remember one time we were sitting around the table having a conversation about God and my family. Talking about do you believe in God? Do you believe in God? And sitting around the dinner table. We sometimes get into weird philosophical conversations around the dinner table with my family. And my dad said, I do believe in God. And he used a kind of, basic logic. I look at things like mountain, which was very similar to the Bible's logic. I look at things like mountains and sunsets, and I can't explain it. And to me, that's just evidence that there is a God. Now, that's not deep, convicting, personal evidence that what an atheist is usually talking about. But there is plenty of evidence enough to start a quest. For example, there are millions upon people who actually believe in God. And their testimony is evidence. Now, that's not evidence that you should now believe in God, but that certainly is evidence that at least some people believe there's a God. Now, I'll hear a counter-argument already. Well, what about space aliens? A bunch of people believe in space aliens. That's totally ridiculous. Yeah, but look at the difference in the quality of the people making the claim. Let's take space aliens. Let's compare it. There's absolutely zero reason on Earth for me to be anything other than agnostic about the reality of extraterrestrial life. I've never encountered an alien, okay? So I have no real good reason to believe that aliens exist, but I also have no really good reason to believe there couldn't be life on some other planet. It perfectly makes sense to me, somewhere in the galaxy, that there could be aliens. So now I go to the people who are making the claim that they've had encounters with aliens. Very, very different type of person than the people who have God encounters. I don't want to overgeneralize, but 99% of the time it's some sort of marginal figure, some sort of no-tooth, no-job guy from some trailer park somewhere in Alabama. Yeah, I had an encounter with space alien. came down, tried to do anal probe on me and said, you ain't getting no anal probe on me, boy. That's the type of person, generally speaking, a marginalized figure in our society. Now let's compare it to the people who have, quote unquote, experiences with God. You ever hear Denzel Washington? Denzel Washington, practicing Christian, will tell you about his experiences with God. Does that strike you as a marginal figure in our society? No. He's probably one of the best actors working today. Debatably. He's one of them. You know, you could say what? De Niro, Pacino, Denzel. Who else would you put in there? Maybe DiCaprio? I don't know. Am I overrating DiCaprio? Jack Nicholson? He's certainly one of the best working actors today. If he's not the best. I would rank De Niro and Pacino a little higher probably. But I may put him in the top 10. Now that's a practicing Christian. So let's just take him, Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr., one of the greatest sociological, one of the greatest political leaders in American history, or civil leaders in American history, however you want to define him. Just those two people right there. Those are pretty prominent, important people in our culture. And both of them have testimonials about the reality of the living God. So if I were not a Christian, I would be inclined to at least go, at least be agnostic on the subject just based on the testimonies of those two people. Not exactly marginalized figures living in a trailer park somewhere with no teeth and no job. Powerful, important people who are really, really prominent and really highly respected and highly respected and well thought of. Articulate. Intelligent. Winners. Overachievers, if anything. And both of them have powerful testimonies about the reality of the living God. So that right there is compelling evidence. Now, I'm not saying that you should now believe in God. If you're hearing that, you're mishearing me. You should now believe that it's at least possible that there's a God based on testimonials like that, and then start seeking the Lord while he may be found. The Bible's pretty clear about the hiddenness of God. The onus of responsibility for connecting to God is on you. Seek the Lord. There's a bunch of different places where it says, seek and ye shall find. Knock and the door will be opened unto you. So it makes clear, A, God is hidden. B, the onus for finding God is on you. C, there's ample evidence, not necessarily for you to case close believe in God, but there's ample evidence for you to at least move from atheist to agnostic on the subject. No, I've never encountered God. But there's plenty of people out there who have encountered God or say they've encountered God, and some of those people are really prominent and reliable and trustworthy, credible people. Really prominent people in history and in the culture at large. Those are those two figures. Martin Luther King Jr., prominent person in history and a prominent person in the culture at large. So that's powerful testimonial evidence. And that's evidence. That's evidence that would stand up in a court of law. Martin Luther King Jr., do you believe in God? Yes, I do. Why? Well, here's a powerful testimonial. Both of those people would be considered reliable sources, credible sources, and those are only two. So let's go back to aliens. I'm agnostic on the subject of aliens, as you should be. As you should also be agnostic on the subject of God rather than atheist. Why? Because you've never encountered God. So you say, well, God can't exist. Well, other people say that they have encountered God. So that's evidence at least that God does exist. Now the onus of responsibility is on you. Seek while he can be found. Seek. And we'll get to, I don't really know how to seek for God. Well, then that's a different story. I accept that. I understand that. As I've tried to point out in some of my other videos, there is no knowledge of God outside of having a spiritual experience. There's no propositional knowledge of God to be had as of yet. Now that may change. People are diligently working on logical arguments for the existence of God, logical proofs for the existence of God as we speak. So the fact that right now, as of this hearing, there is no, as of yet, case closed logical argument for the existence of God, contrary to the opinion of many of my fellow apologists, sorry guys, there isn't one, doesn't mean there won't be one, and potentially very soon. But barring that, there is no knowledge of the proposition God exists outside of the spiritual experience. How I came to decide that God in fact existed was that I had a really powerful, compelling spiritual experience that was 150% real to me. Now, if you're so inclined, you could try to have that experience for yourself. And that's where you could actually come to a reasonable conclusion based on personal evidence that would be compelling to you that God in fact exists. But here's the key. You have to allow yourself to have that experience. Your heart has to be available to that experience, and you have to seek. That's how you find. So, anyways, that's just my first take on the hiddenness for God argument. I'm going to have other videos on the subject. There's a bunch of... This is just one that I was reading on Twitter just right now. So that's just my first take on the subject. Just off the top of my head. There are a bunch of other arguments for the hiddenness of God arguments, some of which are relatively well known and famous that have been dealt with in other videos. I will eventually get to all of them and cover them in depth. But that's just my first spin on the subject right now. That is all for now, kids. Mass is ended. Go in peace. Amen.